Thank you very much for those profound remarks, Antonio, which help as a guide to a really shining, brilliant book, I think. It's incredibly hard for me to respond here because I agree with absolutely everything Antonio said, and as an inherently combative person, I'm sort of a bit at a loss when I have to be peaceful, and just agree. So, what do I do? I think that as I say in my preface, the book is almost like a short summa or a sort of prologue to a summa, and it opens up such a huge range of issues. And all I can do really is add a few footnotes to what Antonio said and invite him maybe to say a few more things about some of the things he's already mentioned. One of the things I found interesting about the book is that Antonio is rejecting the phenomenological approach to the gift, and I agree with him about this. But he's not a dismissive person. He learns from phenomenology where it's valid to do so. And I think one of the most interesting things about the question of how he does relate to phenomenology is the use of Giussani, actually, because as he makes clear that Giussani's talk about the need to go back to an originary experience sounds the most like certain things in Husserl, as I think Antonio would probably agree, the sense that we need to sort of recover an originary experience that we've lost, but with the difference that Antonio reads out in a much more directly realist way and thinks that something like a metaphysical relation to reality would be included in that originary experience. But I think what he takes from Giussani is the way that Giussani thought that you can't sort of readily go directly into metaphysics because if we do that, given the way we normally relate to the world nowadays, you're likely to land up with something like neo-scholasticism, because you will assume that we're sort of subjects facing objects and so on, that we're totally detached from the world. And so in a way, even though ultimately you don't want to remain within subjectivity, you have to sort of recreate a more genuine experience. And it's for that reason that in a rather subtle way, Giussani doesn't sort of simply dismiss all the kind of Protestant emphasis since Schleiermacher on the question of experience. I think he had his own sort of rather interesting take upon that. And I like the way Antonio tries to incorporate that moment, and maybe he could say a little bit more about that and just how that would then cause him to relate to phenomenology, and especially sort of the later trajectory of Husserl, where I think he does get, more and more interesting. I'd also like him to say a little bit more about his indebtedness to Claude Brouwer, and who is actually says things that are incredibly similar to Ulrich, I think. I think that Ulrich and Brouwer are saying extraordinarily similar things, and what is the difference between their kind of metaphysics of the gift on the one hand and the phenomenology of the gift on the other hand? And I think Antonio has already given us certain indications about that. If you try to say that we can confine the gift to phenomenology, we can sort of reduce the gift to something fully given that we can get hold of, even though it's not like an ordinary object. Nonetheless, we can sort of enclose it with our immanence. We can sort of bracket off what lies outside that. And I think this leads you to all kinds of tortuousness, because I think in many ways phenomenology, the odd thing about it is, in the end, it's a positivism. It's sort of positivistic about everything that can't be seen in positivistic terms. And this is why it's incredibly paradoxical, that it's endlessly using this word rigor, you know, and it's like, oh, not the kind of rigor of science, but a different kind of rigor. But it still ends up being an inappropriate attempt to be rigorous about what you can't be completely rigorous about. And I think this has to do very much in the end with the idea that our fundamental relationship to the world, although it is one of, receiving a gift, that part of receiving a gift, and I take this from Antonio's book, is that things appear not only as, some overwhelmingly wonderful disclosures of beauty, but also as enigmatic signs that have to be read. And I think that despite the way Jean-Luc Marion tries to do justice to that moment, in the end he can't, because if a gift is a sign, and if it has to be a sign to be a gift, it can't just be a thing, it has to mean something, then we have to interpret it, and we have to interpret the giver of the gift, who isn't completely manifest in the gift. And therefore, just for that reason, you can't completely separate gift from cause, which is exactly what I think Antonio is trying to say to us. If it's genuinely something that has arrived, then it has arrived in a causal fashion. Okay, this isn't efficient causality. It's a much richer notion of causality. But I think this is just why Antonio is insisting on a sort of realist perspective. And I guess what I would say then here is that there's a sense in which the hermeneutic moment is allied with an ultimately speculative and metaphysical moment if you don't let hermeneutics be completely captured by phenomenology. And I think a lot of contemporary debates are coming to be about the relationship between phenomenology, hermeneutics, and metaphysics. And I'd be interested to know more about that from Antonio. And when it comes to Brouwer, instead of this idea that everything is somehow fundamentally donation, but we're not going to talk about God, then inevitably this donation is something immanent. It's time itself, for Heidegger, to put it very simply, or else it's just some completely mysterious arrival of something anonymous for Marion, which he tries then to salvage as a gift by insisting on the absolute purity and anonymity of the gift. But this is a very nearly sophistic move, in my view, because it means that the gift is so pure, there can't be any recognition of the giver or the content of the gift or the recipient, because in that case, some element of conscious self-interest would arise. But it does mean that when a gift so reduced to absolute purity has become completely impersonal. The gift, it's might as well just be a straight line. There's nothing you can recognize. And a gift has to be a surprise. You have to interpret it as an appropriate surprise. Otherwise, it's an insult or a blow. And none of that is any longer possible in Marion's way of looking at the gift. And then the only thing you can then do beyond that is to sort of invoke revelation. But that does also mean that Marion finds it very hard to escape from after all, from a neo-scholastic duality of nature and grace, that phenomenology becomes the new neo-scholastic prologue, and then revelation is just an extrinsicism. Whereas I think what Antonio is trying to do is to see gift as a mediating category between nature and grace. And this is altogether much more convincing. And in fact, I would go further. I would say that Marion is within onto-theology and Antonio isn't. And I think it's quite easy to demonstrate that, because phenomenology ultimately is a Cartesian project. Descartes is ultimately in this kind of statistic framework, as Marion's own historical work has made absolutely clear. And as soon as you've got this kind of university of being and the idea that sort of God is something ontic and infinite outside the world, of course you think in unilateral terms, because it's no longer that creation exists as participatory. It's no longer only there as a gift. On the contrary, it's something in itself, and the fact that it's created is extrinsic. So unilaterality is part of the univocal outlook. And so to buy into this unilaterality of the gift is to remain within onto-theology. Phenomena, metaphysics in the sense of a discourse about being that has bracketed God, that you could, modern ontology means you can talk about being first of all, and then you have natural theology that talks about God. Of course, there's not a word of natural theology in Aquinas. This is absurd to think there is. It's because he's doing metaphysics, not natural theology. And metaphysics for him is about both being and God. Well, it's about being, but it points towards God. It's not a discourse about God within the discourse about being. That's natural theology. It seems to me that once you've got this discourse about being, that's not also a discourse about God, so you've sort of undone the Aristotelian aporia that way, inevitably this turns into epistemology, because being is simply that which we can look at and get hold of. And the irony is that it's precisely Marion and all his friends who've done absolutely brilliant and exemplary historical work that has shown this. But to understand Marion, you have to read the ontology, the Théologie Blanche de Descartes, the white theology of Descartes, the first book about Descartes, where he has this brilliant demonstration that actually Descartes is completely uneasy about the drift of Suarez accounts of analogy towards something like univocity, and he's trying to avoid it. So, on Marion's account, Suarez is the modern thinker. Descartes is already aware that the discourse about the divine names has been abandoned, but in the end, he can't really avoid univocity, and he lands up with this discourse about causa sui and a univocity of cause. And Marion says throughout the book, look, Descartes might have learnt from people like Cardinal Bérulle the real Dionysian tradition. And so you expect in that book that Marion is saying, we've got to get back to analogy. We've got to get back to analogical mediation, the discourse about the divine names. Does he? Does he? Hell. At the end of the book, he says, no, Descartes opens a new way for theology, which is distance. The distance of the infinite. And this is precisely to remain with this, within this kind of Scotist onto-theological, in fact, agenda. And all of Marion's work afterwards is about distance. It's not about mediation. It's about coming up against a sublime barrier that confines us within finitude, and then only kind of revelation can break through that barrier. And this is what I find very, very interesting about Antonio's alternative approach, building on people like Breuer or on people like Hans Ulrich, which is a metaphysical approach. So what is ontology saying by contrast to phenomenology? Well, I think Antonio has indicated it's saying that everything that exists is given to itself. There is nothing that precedes gift. It's not that you're first there and then you receive a gift. It's not that you have, as for sort of Avicenna or Duns Scotus, a sort of possibilistic essence that God has realized. No, right down to the bottom, you are gift. So it's a paradox. You are a kind of a gift yourself in this strain. And every creature is, in a sense, this gift to itself. And in Breuer's accounts, and this is what I'd like Antonio to say more about, that implies a kind of inner reflexivity in every creature. To exist at all, they have to receive themselves as gift and then give themselves to themselves, in a sense, in order also to praise their creator. So it becomes a kind of divine liturgy model as you get in Maximus. But for Breuer, this has the clear implication that the first created realities are spirits. In other words, this is not the picture that so many Christians have, and which I think is perfectly awful, that God sort of creates a world of, barren rocks, and then decides to stick animals on them, and then decides to stick human beings on them. This is exactly the kind of picture that an awful lot of French Catholic thought has been progressively rejecting, and this is one reason why it has so much turned to Neoplatonism, in a way that perhaps in the Americas only Wayne Hankey has perhaps fully grasped, and all credit to him for doing that. People like Jean Touillard, who grew up in the Nouvelle Theology, but felt that they had to insert more Neoplatonism into the picture, precisely because they wanted to insist on the idea that what first emerges from God is spirit. Because if a created thing is a gift, and a gift to yourself of the gift that you are, then the fundamentally created thing is the angel or the human being, with possibly the implication, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, that we would have to add vitalism and panpsychism to that picture, in some sense or other. I think that's a real question that arises. Mustn't everything be in some degree spirit in order to be created? But what is the difference then between Breuer's outlook and Heidegger's outlook? Well, I suppose that, to put it rather simply and probably far too crudely, that Breuer would be admitting that he's carrying out an act of interpretation. He could see things in a Heideggerian way, perhaps. He could sort of reduce the ontological to an ontic passage through time. But you might have the sense, why have we done that? We've sort of reduced the mystery of being, but nonetheless we don't have sort of direct access to the mystery of being. And if we follow through Heidegger's profound intuition that we're not, that being does arrive, it seems to be a gift. But if one remains with that metaphor more strongly than Heidegger did, and in the end, Heidegger just reduces that to impersonal drift, so it becomes nihilism. But if you remain more strongly with that Heideggerian intuition, we have to give him enormous credit for that, then aren't you taken to something like God? But it's nonetheless a reading of reality. It's a reading of yourself as gift. So it's a point where a hermeneutic moment becomes a speculative moment that becomes a metaphysics, I think. And in my mind, this is why Nicholas of Cusa insists on the category of conjecture, which sounds very cold, but I don't think it's meant to be. I think it's sort of the link between the hermeneutic and the metaphysical, if you like. And so I think this is the difference, that Breuer is saying we can only see ourselves as gifts if interpretatively we read ourselves as the gift of a giver and therefore already or the gift of the creator. And if you like, this is a kind of foundational theology, certainly. But I think the anticipation, if we're thinking in sort of Lubacian terms, of grace is very, very strong, because it suggests that, our destiny is to be united with the source of the gifts, God, the giver, who goes on and on giving and doesn't withhold anything of himself. And our desire can't be satisfied until we see God, and so on. So I find a very natural and agreeable slide in Antonio's book, From Creation to Grace, and from a kind of natural understanding of the world to a reading of the world in Trinitarian terms. I think maybe I'd like to ask him more about how he thinks that sort of Trinitarian ontology fits with revelation as a historical event, and what kind of philosophy of history might arise out of this picture. But nonetheless, I fundamentally love the way in which he's edging towards a Trinitarian ontology or metaphysics. I think myself, and I've written about this a little bit in an obscure Italian volume about Aquinas, that one can argue there is really a Trinitarian metaphysics in Thomas Aquinas, and it comes out most strongly in that passage of the Summa Contra Gentiles, where he says that everything that exists are sort of rising degrees of more and more immanent emanation, so that we're emanating a word, and that finally reaches a summit within God. And I think then there are very interesting issues. Antonio, as I would, has insisted on the reciprocal dimension of the gift, where the phenomenologists insist on the unilateral dimension. And I think that's because they are they are stuck within this immanentist perspective. I think somehow reciprocity goes along with a more realist attitude. But I think there's a really odd paradox here, that in many ways, all the people who want to reject gift as exchangeable, the idea that a gift, although it doesn't expect a return, also does expect a return, because we want relationality. We actually do want the people we invite to dinner to invite us back, because otherwise we won't be friends. It's just as simple as that. It's no more complicated than that. But it is a paradox. It is a paradox. It almost does break the law of non-contradiction, and yet that's the sort of contradictory law that we live by. But the really odd thing about Marion is that he says that the impossible gift is beyond the law of non-contradiction. That it's that it makes no sense. It's just a horizon. But then why not admit directly that our normal ideas of gift, that where we can recognize a giver and a receiver and a gift, are themselves already beyond the laws of non-contradiction? It's because, again, he wants to erect a sort of firm barrier between the finite and the infinite, instead of allowing that actually this is Nicholas of Cusa, that actually what is beyond the law of non-contradiction breaks into our world. We live by paradox. I mean, obviously, at this point, I think we have to go completely beyond Thomas Aquinas, and this would be another way in which I think we need to insert more Neoplatonism into our Christian theology if we're to save the game. But my main point is, why not recognize that paradoxicality as going on, within the world? And so we get this very strong insistence in Antonio on reciprocity. And what's interesting about that is that it is kind of horizontal dimension, isn't it? It's the horizontality of God, that the Trinity is a kind of infinite gift exchange, and we participate in that. And so I suppose there's an interesting question here. Maybe you could say more about it. How do we articulate the horizontal there with the vertical? Possibly that is quite complicated, I think, because there's a sense in which to be God's giving of us is much more unilateral. And yet it's also paradoxically the case that if we're gift through and through, we can only exist at all by making the return of worship. So there's a sort of extreme paradoxical coincidence there of absolute unilaterality, if you like, with absolute reciprocity. And a further thing I would like to ask is that, the degree to which you would agree that we have to sort of, in a way, transcend the contrast between the unilateral and the reciprocal. Not just insist on the reciprocal, but to go beyond the absolute contrast of the two, because it seems that that's what the gift requires, that it's utterly paradoxical, and yet we're living it out all the time. Maybe this is just the way in which we are encountering the divine. So I've tried to sort of hint at the ways in which I think this metaphysics of the gift is offering a new dimension. It's allowing us to sort of rethink the great realist metaphysical tradition. And even though, as you say, you don't touch much on sort of metaphysical, on economic and political and social aspects of the gift, nonetheless, I think your kind of metaphysics of a reciprocal gift has much more direct relevance than phenomenology to thinking about economics and society and social practices and so on. And actually, as you will know, some of the thinkers within Focolare, Piero Coda and Bruni and Zamani make just that connection, I think, between a sort of gift exchange economics, and a metaphysics of the gift that is also a Trinitarian metaphysics. Well, these were kind of hopelessly random comments, but they were just an invitation to you to sort of expand on a few more things. Thanks, Antonio.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's hard to respond, I think, also. Thank you. Well, first, I guess a confession, I guess, this is, for me, it's this question of the relationship between metaphysics and phenomenology is a task to deepen, no? First and foremost, no? And I see there are many points of that have been very much helped, but there are also points of contrast, no? So then I think that, it's something I began to do, but at the same time is also something that I need more time to think and work on this. No? Now so a few things then, I guess. Phenomenology is a rather broad category, right? And so is Husserl, is Heidegger, maybe perhaps Gadamer does hermeneutics. Then Marion presents himself as the legitimate successor of Heidegger, so on and so forth, right? And then the people I dealt with more directly are Heidegger for one thing, and then also Marion as well. No, so I mean these are the people I have more on mind, on my side, I guess, when I deal with this phenomenological question, right? Now, the thing that I find perplexing in this attempt, I think you put it very well, this unilateral approach to donation, in this for the sake of preserving the integrity of the gift. I guess there is this concern that if gift, I mean, to me, along with reciprocity, is the dimension of gratuity, in here. If gift is perceived as such and reciprocated, then what one loses is what's perhaps most characteristic of gift, namely its gratuity. Hence, there has to be some sort of a donation that brackets, the giver, the gift, and the receiver. Then I think that yeah, Marion got a little bit, I think, too much into this discussion with Derrida as well, no? And so who has a more radical view, I think, no, on this matter. I mean, I think for Derrida, the discussion on gift is just is a placeholder, just to say the impossible. I think, as far as I understand Derrida, no. No, that this is a term just to show that what is also what it's not. So I mean, this kind of coming together of what is and its opposite beyond the law of contradiction, right? Now, the he rejects Marion. No, Marion rejects, has qualms with Claude Breuer. No, I mean, in a sense, Breuer was his mentor to a certain extent. No, he was also the, I guess, at the origin of the French edition of Communio as well. And Marion told me that everything that good that Breuer got on gift, he took it from him. And then what it wasn't good is because it's still too Hegelian. No, I mean, Breuer, no, he said no. So now the thing is, all right. So what is the alternative in here? I think to me it seems that reality is the starting point. No, I mean the book my book has also been criticized because of this, of not being cast into a language of donation, understood with Marion or Derrida, no, and in a sense it's also this belief, so to say, it's been called that way, in causality, and then to talk about gift within a metaphysical framework is. First is passé, so then it won't gain any hearing, right?
No, you're much trendier. All my students laugh at people who don't believe in metaphysics. It's totally cool to be. After speculative realism, there's nothing more passé than phenomenology. Don't worry, you're really cool in that.
Well, it's good to know.
They titter about it in bars.
So. Then I mean, to me, it's this, this understanding of it comes for them, this understanding of being as presence or being as absence. That is that they understand fullness in the sense of just being compact. There's no room for anything there to happen or to reveal itself. So hence there has to be this undetermined. Manifestation, but it's hard to think of this approaching it from a metaphysical point of view, because whenever you're talking about revelation and manifestation and surcroît, superabundance, as he says, you are always thinking of something revealing or someone revealing something to someone else, whereas this is what they're saying, there's something prior, more deeper than this, that allows you to talk about someone revealing something to someone else. That's why they claim to fame. So anyhow, so then the what I see in here is this. Hence the starting point on experience. I think that is to me it brings in a number of elements. The aspect of subjectivity. This. Which I think is a very important. It has to be integrated, in the thinking of being, the awareness of it, not just simply as, because otherwise it's one is always caught up in this kind of naive realism. So it's a bringing of subjectivity in the thinking of being, and perhaps also in a certain way in the constitution of being itself. The perception of reality as a sign, which I describe in the book in these terms of a gift and logos. So the gift also has a meaning intrinsic to it that can be seen and perceived, but then also a taste of what gratuity means. Because I mean, this paradoxical nature that we want to be reciprocated, it's also reciprocation, that the one that we seek is that it has to be gratuitous, no? Because when the reciprocation is a duty, it's not really a response, no? You mentioned also this this aspect of is reciprocity horizontal, right? Now this just moving on to another question. So to me here is one needs to decide the starting point. I think there are many good things that one can learn from phenomenology, you know, this understanding of above all revelations to me, and then the play of giving and hiding, revealing and hiding. No, I think there's much to be thought there. No, okay. Then the other aspect of this is reciprocity horizontal, right? Yes and no, right? I think no. This my attempt is to say that is both, right? I mean, in a sense, at the anthropological level, it is first it's a no. No, is because what comes first is the fact that one has been given to oneself. So the first act of response in whatever one is doing is to the origin, which is God. No, but one does that through the normal interaction, the normal exchanges of gift and donation, right? So it's so the horizontal dimension, the responding to someone who has given something to me, requires this deeper acknowledgement of the recognition of the ultimate giver. No, hence again the importance of experience. No, and I would also say in God, no, there are both kinds. No, although this is perhaps more complicated to say, no, because. You have both, on the one hand, total equality of the divine persons, right? But then at the same time, there's a hierarchy of sorts, no? I mean, the Father is the unpreceded giver, no? And without him, there is no unity, no gift, no? But he does, and this is the interesting thing, he does so in a way that. There is never a before and after. It always includes, in a mysterious way, also the fact of he's the Father of the Son, hence also the relationship with the Son, and with him the overabundance of the Spirit. No, I guess that along with this, so the way that puts together these two axes, I think is gratuity. No, the thought of.
Could I just make a suggestion here, because I've just remembered I meant to say this, that it's possible that there's a sort of relationship between the need to transcend the contrast between the reciprocal and the unilateral, and an equal need, which I think Antonio is now hinting at, to transcend the contrast between the vertical and the horizontal. So what I mean by this is that I don't think the situation of mutual gift giving is simply a nice liberal democratic situation. On the contrary, I think it's a situation of tangled hierarchy as much as reciprocity. So conversation is not a democratic activity. It's outrageous, you know, and political correctness needs to stop it now. It's really bad. People just say things to other people without asking their permission, first of all. It's just an appalling imposition, you know? And there's a sense in which then the speaker, like me now, is in a hierarchically superior position, but also actually the sense in which you're in a hierarchically superior position, because you're sitting there judging me, you know? And so this isn't, it's a situation of complex, tangled hierarchy in which one person's on top, then the other person, and it goes on like that. And sort of, so in that sense, maybe we can understand how metaphysically the horizontal and the vertical might be related. That God is sort of constituting us vertically, but actually he's immediately bringing us into participation in the Trinity. And absolutely, there's a sort of hierarchy within the Trinity. I think I'd probably go a little further and say, in some sense, the Son, you can also think of the Son as above the Father and the Spirit above it goes around like that, you know, because the Father can only understand through the Son, etc. But nonetheless, a kind of hierarchy is involved. It's not what the fathers of the American Constitution had in mind. You know, it's more difficult than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Then just another thought about this. I don't know if this perception of mine is right, so then I would welcome your comments on this. No, it seems sometimes to me it seems that this enshrining of donation as the main category through which to read what it means to give, and what the gift is, seems to me that it's. But then here, I mean, it's a very complex issue. Anyhow, it seems to me sometimes is this because what is this movement, so to say, this movement of a giving without a giver, a gift or a receiver, ultimately at least that can be perceived, no? And then that's why I one of my rhetorical questions at the end, if you wish to call it that way, no, was that this is a hypostatization of sorts, no? This thinking of donation as the category to understand what the gratuity of being, and that is in a sense ultimately it's an attempt to think the Holy Spirit, so to say, away from a whole Trinitarian background that it needs to be, no? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, you know, the fact that the Holy Spirit is the gift and the condylexia, as you talk about in Richard of something, makes it very hard to think of this in terms of, you know, the philosophers of donation. It's incredibly difficult because it's, and the whole model of love involved. You know, you know, the Spirit is the bond of love, but he's also the third that the Father and the Son love in Richard of St. Victor's Sons, which are repeated by Aquinas in De Potentia, I think, somewhere, question 9. Absolutely. And again, there's a sort of unilateral moment, but there's also reciprocity.
Then the response to your question, then this panpsychism, no? That is a question I have as well. Now, first, so where is it coming from, right? So then is the perception that in order to talk about being as gift, the category of a spirit is needed, right? Now, whenever you are speaking of God, the angels, or the human being, that still makes sense. This kind of one can deal with this approach. Now, then the issue also becomes what it means when we have defining being. You also have to include subhuman realities, no, which are not endowed with freedom and consciousness as the human and the higher beings are, right? Now, I think that Breuer gets this perception of a spirit not so much as animus, no, soul, or even it's perhaps more in the sense of Geist, no, in the German sense of the term. Without at least his claim, without reproposing Hegel in a different view. No? I mean, in a sense, what Breuer claims to do is to replace Hegelian negativity with donation, and then he thinks that can work. No, that is.
There's a bit of shelling in there.
Yes, totally. Now, on the one hand, beware what he derives. So he takes spirit in the twofold sense of the word, as nous and pneuma, right, as intelligence, and as pneuma, I guess, is the movement of reflection, of interiority and exteriority, inspiration and expiration, right? And then reads one into each other. So then he says he perceives this dimension of a spirit also for any specific being, in the sense that the unity of the phenomenon and the noumenon, what constitutes every concrete singular, right? Its interiority and exteriority, right? It's made possible by the fact that being is also spirit. So he regards this spirit as the movement according to which a finite being remains one, reveals itself, lets itself be known without losing itself in the process, right? Kenneth Schmitz, also who taught here as well, also signals to the category of a spirit in order to further think that of the reality of donation, but not in this sense of beware, more in the sense of that spiritual relationships are constitutive and non-invasive, in the sense that one can teach, communicate knowledge or angst, depends, and without losing oneself or intruding in the other. I don't think that this necessarily leads us to panpsychism, as you said, but it's definitely it's definitely a question. This one, why not?
Not maybe literal panpsychism, but the idea that there's something anticipating consciousness in the non-conscious world, I think.
Yeah, I think what it would need to be thought is in what sense spontaneity at the subhuman level, for example, has to do with freedom. So then one would have to think of freedom not simply just as a faculty of the soul or the spirit, but as having to do with being itself.
How would one think the metaphysics of the Psalms, when they talk about creatures, proclaiming the glory of God, everything that exists?
Yeah, exactly. So, right, maybe some questions if there are any.
I wonder if I could ask both of you to talk about the relationship between gift and ownership. It seems to me that one of the problems with the phenomenological reading of gift, there's always a denial of ownership to in fact genuinely receive something and take possession of it would seem to pollute the gift from a phenomenological perspective, and I know we have a strong temptation to think of gratuity always in terms of simply letting go, so that the proper response to a gift is to return it, but that's a gift that doesn't fit. You return it. It seems to me that the proper response to a gift is first and most radically to take it and own it, and the reciprocation comes from that. And I know, Father Antonio, you wrote about ownership in the gift in here, and speak about overcoming precisely that. To think through a certain kind of ownership in relation, that notion of being as gift transforms. It doesn't deny ownership, but transforms it. And Professor Milbank, I know that you have written a good bit on this, the radical poverty among the sort of Middle Ages, and that radical rejection of ownership seems to be connected also to a false interpretation of the meaning of
You
gift.
then get mere ownership.
Right, as a fruit of it.
Yes.
Right.
That doesn't have anything to do with the gift
Yeah.
at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it just it seems that there are all sorts of very interesting connections that could be made among all these points.
Yes.
But I wonder if the two of you could speak to that.
Do you want to say?
Go first, and then.
Yes, and I guess the sort of Brouwer model that Antonio is dealing with sort of allows for that you can only receive the gift by then kind of giving it to yourself and owning it. And it's not a matter of a mere gesture of gratitude, as it would seem to be on the model favoured by the phenomenologists. I should stress, by the way, that I think that Merleau-Ponty is much more open to a reciprocal model. You know, it's not necessarily the case but the tendency of, but by the same token, Merleau-Ponty is a little more open, I think, to the ontological and to the semiotic, and there are links. But yeah, David is rightly drawing attention to something I'm interested in, this sort of, what I call this sort of dialectics of purity, that the danger is that the more you insist on an absolute purity, the more it's unrealizable, and the more you think of what actually happens in a sort of debased way, and you sort of drift towards a kind of Manichaeanism. And I mean, Giorgio Agamben has drawn attention, for example, to the fact that the spiritual Franciscans often seem to reject culture as such. They will talk of themselves as animals. And it's really interesting, you know, as if our fallenness means we've forgotten how to be a human animal, and the whole of culture is fallen, you know. And this relates strongly, of course, you know, to debates about was the property in Eden, you know, with most of the Latin tradition tending to suggest that there wasn't. And this is taken further by the Franciscans, who deny even collective property in Eden. But that actually the Greek patristic tradition more allowing both property and kingship in Eden, so that it's sometimes forgotten that when Aquinas is more Aristotelian about this, he's also, I think, being more Greek patristic. He's being more Greek twice over. And I'm kind of a bit Chestertonian Bellockian about this. I think we shouldn't be totally negative about property, that it's related to the personality and so on. And Pierre Manon makes his book, a point in his book, that sort of when the Greeks in the city get the idea of the common good, that already presupposes sort of paternalistic property owners coming together, that you know, that you're sharing the common good, because there is already you know, some sense of ownership, so that you know, it's not kind of pure private property on the one hand, and it's not sheer communist anarchy on the other hand. There's a sense in which if you have sheer communist anarchy, you don't need the common good. So that I think that it would be in the spirit of what you're saying to suggest that the common good does require some kind of account of private property, not in a sort of Hobbesian Lockean sense, but in a sense of, you know, property you make good use of, and ultimately for the common good. And yet, so that part of my more kind of political reason for favouring gift as reciprocity would be that I don't want to have these absolute boundaries. I want that things like ordinary economic exchanges, contracts and so on to be infused with some sort of gift dimension. And there's a whole literature about how even the most apparently mercantile economies do have this dimension to them, and that we, you know, we need to increase that. So part of my worry about sort of Derrida and Marion is that they're actually not deconstructing this sort of modern boundary between a sort of private sphere of pure gratuity and a public sphere of absolutely kind of literal contracts, and sort of in the more they're refusing that sort of realm of, the contract and the utilitarian and so on. They're not asking whether it can be in any way tempered, whether there's any mediation, and surely all our experience tells us that there is. There are all sorts of hybrid phenomena, even today. And, because I'm not a utopian, I think it's very important to encourage that hybridity if we are to improve the world. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I deal with this from, I guess from the way that you heard at the beginning, from the point from a more metaphysical and Trinitarian aspect. So then more so than the actual economic exchanges, I deal more from the point of view of what it means to be and the relationship between people. Right? Now I guess then I would say these things. I mean, first is the ownership begins with the fact that one is given to oneself, and that this, but that doesn't mean just simply being let be, right? It also has the task of at the second act, at the second level of spiritual beings, of accepting oneself as well as such, as accepting to have been created, and or discovering why it is that it is good to be, although one is not God. Why is that? Now this, but this is always a dialogical event, so to say, because the discovery of one's own giftedness happens through one's own experience, one's own, that is to say, engagement with others, with the world and with God. So this, the first, the gift needs to be received, which in the case of the singular being means to let that original gratuity and orientation towards the sword inform whatever one is and does. Then it's true that then ownership is tainted, and is tainted by this radical ingratitude, which with theological terms you can call it, is called this original sin. You can it's original ingratitude. So then what it means to be is always patterned after a monadic God, of sorts, that has proven itself to be jealous, of what it is not. So then to have is a synonym of to keep, and then so that's why the many times the instinctive reaction towards terminology of ownership within given is kind of saying it doesn't belong there, because to be and gift giving is all about gratuity, right? Now, but I think it's good to recognize that why the logic of gift is tainted, by sin, and in what sense, Then so then what reveals in what way is the ownership or belonging, it's a positive reality. I think there are, well, you can think of this in different ways, but these two. The first one is perhaps the realization of that. Bringing in other terminology that I speak about this in the book, not in my presentation, that in the gift giving you have the erotic, the agapic dimension and also the communal dimension. So one desires to be welcomed, to be received. One expects to be received, and one gives oneself with the expectation of being received and reciprocated. yeah, again here eros has been tainted as well in many different ways, no? But it's not. If one is true to one's own experience, so to say, it's not always the case that the desire for unity with the other, no, eros, it's a corruption, no, of what the other is. So that's one area, no, with that help us think what ownership means. Then the other one is the Christological, no, in which you discover ownership. In the book, I talk about this as in terms of virginity, no, and to me the interesting aspect in here is that the possibility of recognizing that the other is given, that oneself is given, that there can be can be an authentic belonging in the sense that one can say, you are mine, I am yours, the world is mine, so to say, no. What virginity discloses, this unity and distance, no, is possible thanks to the because the relationship between the two is always held together and apart by God, who is triune, no? And this is what virginity allows us to see more clearly, no. When one loses this vertical axis, no, then there is either only distance, right, or simply a unity that eliminates difference, no. Instead, I think within the language of gift giving, what puts together the unity and the distinction is this overabundant aspect of gift giving that in Christian language we call virginity.
So do you mean that literally or as a metaphor or both? Because in the case of both Balthasar and Bouillet, there's often a very strong emphasis on the superiority of virginity, which sometimes goes so far as to sort of favour the Greek fathers over Augustine on this kind of issue. And obviously the Catholic Church has a long history of sort of seeing virginity as the superior path, but is not wouldn't there be then a danger in that of how would you reconcile that with sort of Richard of St. Victor's account of the Trinity, where, you know, the Father, Mother, Child, as for Balthasar, indeed, you know, is incredibly important analogue for the Trinity, you know, which might suggest that we need both the sort of more material analogue and the more spiritual analogue of virginity. And the danger, maybe, of going with Balthasar, the sense of the superiority of virginity outright, would be to suggest the sort of vertical is straightforwardly superior to the horizontal. And it's at this one point where Protestantism may have something significant to say, actually. That you know, asceticism can be in danger of being an idolatry. Because God's not an alternative to this world. You know, that's my worry about over-elevation of virginity.
Yeah.
In a funny kind of way, a certain dimension in Lutheranism has been, or Anglicanism, has been more Catholic than Catholics over that sort of issue. But, you know, I'd like your comments on that.
I think that I would agree with that if by virginity or celibacy one has only in mind the sacrificial aspect it involves, or the negative definition of just simply not being married.
I fully accept it's
right.
not just negative.
So, so the ascesis part
and I fully accept that the importance of some people being following that path and the ascetic path. But
thank you.
But the question is of whether we need to have a hierarchy any longer of that over the married path, really.
Yeah, I think. Well, this is also it's a very broad, very interesting question. I think to me, so just one brief thing is it's not. So the why? So it's the whole question of so why do we have the evangelical councils? No, that's, to begin with, no, and why is that that separation there? Now the thing is that if one has a dialectic understanding of the two states of life, the life of the councils and the secular life is hard to reconcile. I mean, I think with that I agree completely. You know, and now I would still hold to a hierarchy, but not in the sense that eliminates one eliminates the other, no, but in the sense that
they're still complementary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then also in a different way within its own specificity, right? What marriage is the experience of love that takes place within marriage finds its fulfillment in the gift giving that we call virginal. Right.
Yeah.
Now, John Paul II explains this in terms of so what is the logic of gift giving is an upside logic, you know, in which one is free to give oneself to the other, right? And this the archetype of this is Trinitarian and Christological, right? Hence, what this freedom that one enjoys in the giving of oneself is first of all eschatological, and that is participated in two ways in history. One is through the life of the councils, and then the other one sacramentally, no, through married love. No, so I guess in that that way, I think that if one doesn't preserve the priority of original love, one is not able to see the continuity and discontinuity between married love and virginal love, and hence one loses both.
Could one see it though as a tangled hierarchy in which virginity is superior because it points towards God, and obviously God is the origin, he is above the world, and yet because God is not simply another thing, he's not higher in an ontic sense,
yeah.
He's ontological.
Yeah.
There's another sense in which marriage and mother, father, child more anticipates the inner life of God.
Yeah, I think that there's a relationship between the two, right? I mean, in a sense, what is this eschatological life is also a wedding feast, no?
Yes.
So, and then these perfections of love that you were mentioning, you know, this motherhood, fatherhood, sponsality, also belong to God as well. No, so then how that is explained is, it's a beautiful thing to do, right?
Yeah, and I think part of the, the whole, gradually there's been more of a nuptial theology in the Catholic Church, and I'm profoundly sympathetic to this, but I mean, I think it does ultimately mean that a fuller sacramental recognition of the bodily, the physical, of sex as a sacrament, and I think there's just a little holding back from that in Balthasar, and I really think you have to go all the way if you're going to have a fully nuptial theology, and if you're going to resist the appalling debasement of human relationships in the secular world, we have to more see the way of married love as a sacrament. Really in the way that somebody, actually D.H. Lawrence saw it, that we've got to see him as a surprising Christian witness there, and to see that not having had that enough in the past is part of the problem of where we've got to now. That way, it's a provocation, but
well, we're the Marriage and Family Institute after all.
Exactly.
So
yes.
No, I
exactly.
agree that there's I mean, historically speaking, there's been a lot of misunderstandings on this area, no, and one of the contributions of recent authors is both a discovery of virginity in its true meaning, deepest meaning, and then at the same time, paradoxically, I mean, maybe not so, it also comes with a defense on the integrity of marriage for what it is. No? So,
yeah, actually, thank you very much to both for your very inspiring words. And no, I mean, actually, Father Antonio already more or less addressed a little bit my question. We already spoke a lot about this topic, but if you could say a little bit more actually about this last point on virginity, that is evident also from your chapter in the book. You don't take just stricto sensu, no? You take, especially in a spiritual, almost ontological sense, as the ultimate form of love. It seems to me, no? And so one of the things that fascinated me the most in the book, I have to say, is this dialogue, as also Dr. Milbank emphasized, with a reduced concept of gift and donation, the phenomenological one, and especially this criticism of this necessity of the anonymity of the gift to be anonymous in order to be gift, and therefore the reflection on gratuity. And it seems to me now you're suggesting that there seems to be first a sort of lack of faithfulness to what you would call original experience of. No, actually, when I give a gift, what am I doing? Even in the most basic sense, the meaning of the gift is to be a sign of love. And what is missing there, it seems to me, is also a reflection on the relationship of distinction, in a certain sense, between the gift and love, whose end, as we know traditionally, is unity. No, love tends to union. No, and therefore, if you could say something more about the relationship between gift and love as vis unitiva, no? So what's the kind of unity that love pursues, and what's the place of gift in it? And second, now that you were talking about virginity, actually, you made me think that probably the category of virginity would be the only way of integrating in a positive way the good sort of exigence that in a wrong way is expressed through this emphasis on distance and anonymity, or transforming into the category of permanent mystery of the other, no, that remains there. And so, yeah, I guess my question is, how do you see the relationship between these three concepts as a possible way of addressing a more integral doctrine of the gift? There is gift, love, virginity. No, I don't know. I mean,
yes,
it's to both.
Well, I do try to think this relationship between gift and love. I see them as, in a certain sense, maybe perhaps coextensive. What gift represents is the dynamic dimension, so to say, of the donation of itself, on which love consists. No, so love is gift of self. No, at the same time, what love secures, right, is this. Or reveals is that this donation of self is the unfolding, is the revelation of a unity. No, thinking about God, no, and then a unity that needs to take place at the created level. No, to me that's also why this the relationship between gift and love also needs to bring into the other aspect of communion as well. No, because to secure the unity and the difference. Now why is it possible to talk about any of these? No, I think it's and not just simply stick to the category of the good that gives of itself naturally no, as the Greek thought has done. I think it's ultimately it's possible because I think it's a theological presupposition. God has revealed Himself as tri-personal love, really, no? And that is what gives, at least in my mind, the final grounding, no, to all this interplay, no, between the one and the many, the relationship between God and the world, no. And I'm saying this because this donation, this communication of being or love, it's preserves the irreducibility of identity and total union only because of God is triune. I mean, to me here the difficult question to think is what is characteristic of the person of the Holy Spirit. No, so in tradition, it's the procession of the Spirit is mainly being interpreted in passive terms. It's the one that is breathed forth, and there are some inklings to an active, quote-unquote, active role of the Spirit. You know, it's not that everybody has to do something in God as well. No, because I mean that would be bringing ontological difference in God. No, but I think that the active, so to say, the active role of the Holy Spirit in God needs to be thought more adequately. You know, there's much reflection on this being done. No, yeah, and that's what I also try to do a little bit. You know, in one chapter dedicated to the Spirit. Then I agree also completely. You know, this aspect of I always find difficult to talk about virginity is normally misunderstood, and but I think that the what it offers when it's seen as the form of love is this there again a total unity of two in a third that preserves both the unity and the distinction. Now we call it virginity because that is the historical way in which Christ loved, right? And then one could say whether it's legitimate or not to talk about this with regards to God. There are some fathers of the church that hint at this, that is legitimate, no, but that needs to be thought more carefully. And also to answer the question that you raised before, no, if that is the form of love, then what does it mean that a human being images God given the two states of life? No, yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with all those comments, and I think one of the dimensions of gift is that it's a risk because it's not like a blueprint. If you give somebody a gift, you don't know what they're going to do with it. Yeah. And in a sense, it's a mark of the gift that it will be developed creatively by the recipient. And in that sense, gift is very linked to the problematic of repetition and of non-identical repetition. And I think that relates to what you say about the need to see the great importance of the Holy Spirit. But I think that does raise the issue about whether we have far too mimetic a relationship to the normativity of Christ. And that's the kind of thing that probably grew up, first of all, in the 12th century. They already revealed much more with the Jesuits. This idea that sort of, and the idea of the literal imitation of Christ at the end. Mm-hmm. And there's a real danger of substituting that for non-identical repetition. That, you know, how are we faithful to Christ? We've got to be faithful to the Spirit of Christ. And I would push this quite radically. I think it's very important to read both Peggy and Dostoevsky on this subject. So, you know, both Peggy and Dostoevsky really press the questions. Can we see the fact that Jesus, you know, doesn't get married, doesn't fight? Can we see those as revelations of universal norms? And actually they both imply no, because that would be to deny the contingency of the incarnation. You know, precisely Jesus is the revelation of God, not as abstractions, but as this particular concrete life in that situation. So I'm very hesitant about linking Christ to a higher normativity of virginity, or even to a higher normativity of pacifism. So in Péguy's, The Mystery of the Charity of Jeanne d'Arc says, but the French wouldn't have run away. Okay, the disciples of Christ did. The French peasants wouldn't have run away. The French nobles wouldn't have run away. And it's a really seriously important question. Why should we take the fact that the disciples ran away as a universal revelation of the human condition? We've got to be very cautious about that. It's what happened in one circumstance. And therefore, we can only be true to the Gospels in the sense of this non-identical repetition. This is why my dear friend Ron Williams, whom I usually agree with, I think he's completely wrong about the idiot. He misses the point that Prince Mishkin is an outrageous Christ because he's this person who's erotically muddled about women. But Dostoevsky's saying, yeah, if God was incarnate today, it might look like that, because he's wishing to insist on this historical contingency. And that, that, of course, it has to be significant that Christ is incarnate at that point in time. But the point still stands. Our times are different, and therefore it's always a non-identical repetition. And in that sense, the Spirit which is the Spirit of Jesus, indeed, but it's always going to look different. Maybe even that will stop Christians being, thinking twice before saying Muhammad is a totally outrageous figure, even though I'm deeply suspicious of all sorts of aspects of some expressions of Islam. Nonetheless, it might make us hesitate.
Yeah. I think maybe just to conclude, no? Right.
Yeah.
But just one thing. I don't talk about this in the book, but a way I began to conceive of this is the idea. Love. It's a relationship between persons, right? And then what kind of, how can we name those relationships, right? And then the ones that we have in God is fatherhood, filiality, or sonship, and then is the relation without a name, which is the procession of the Spirit. No? Then how does the human being participate in this relationship? If not is but through the door of the relationship of the Son with the Father. So then in here you the human being is brought within that relation of filiality, but which is man's relationship with God. But then also it. You have other two which are, in a sense, not in God, no? That the union with man affects. One is nuptiality, which indicates the relationship between Christ and the Church, and then also divine motherhood, no? Which also speaks about the difference between the divine begetting of the Son and the human begetting of the Son. No? So I think that's ways of thinking about this. And then the human being called to participate in love in history, participates in these relations.
You probably know that Marion concludes that the father is a far more fundamental figure of the gift than the mother, because the father is detached.
Yeah.
I don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
And unknown sometimes, right?
No, I don't buy that one,
All right. Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.